Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the show. We are on the road this week in Charleston, South Carolina, and so we're doing the live remotely today. So it'll be interesting to see if we can pull it off. We hadn't done that in about 8 months. We used to do it all the time. It's been a while since we've done the show live somewhere else except the studio. So it's nice to be out on the road and out amongst the people again. Anyway, I do have my handy mask here with me so that when we're over, we can put those back on. But anyway, it's good to be with you. The point of Power Lunch Live is to bring today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, CEOs, people who are doing amazing work in the world, who we can learn from, and so who we can get better from because of their wisdom that they share with us here on the show. Now, we are broadcasting on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and of course, LinkedIn Live. We will monitor those feeds throughout the show. So if you have a comment for Peter today, for our guest, for me, please put it in the feed on whatever platform you're on, and we monitor those during the show, and we'll get back to you. We can even answer those questions live on the air. Now, today I've got Peter Winick. Peter is the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. For the past 2 decades, he has helped individuals and organizations build and grow revenue streams by designing and growing their thought leadership platforms. You have to give his podcast a listen. It's called Leveraging Thought Leadership. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rhett.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sound is good? Good.
Yep, sound is good.
So how has COVID-19 and all the social issues that we're facing, how is that impacting leadership and when you're working with them on their thought leadership, how is that changing what they're saying? Is it changing that at all, the message?
Yeah, no, it's totally changing the message. So, I mean, I think there's 2 different questions, the COVID issue and the social unrest issue. So let me sort of unpack those because I think they're different, right? It is cyclical and it runs against the business cycles, right? So I'm old enough to recall in the last time we had a market crash, which was sort of hold my beer compared to COVID. If you go back to 2006 and 2007, it was the happiness avalanche. So every book that came out, Sean Aker, Gretchen Rubin, Dan Gilbert, happiness. And you're like, what the hell was going on with all this happiness? This is kind of ridiculous. And you go, well, think of it as a period piece. Well,
right.
Full employment, stock market's on fire, people getting second and third mortgages, buying condos on the beach and Hummers they couldn't afford. So they're happy, right? Until they weren't. And then the market crashed. At the point that 2008 happened and the market crashed, you couldn't give away that stuff. Why? Because it just wasn't relevant anymore. It would sound tone deaf. It would sound not connected to where people's heads, hearts, and minds are. So what happened? Then we came out with grit, reinvention, resilience, innovation. So I think there's a similar thing happening right now where if you go back to February, what was in vogue? And it almost sounds, it's comical, but it's not. The war for talent. We're not living in a war for talent anymore, unfortunately. The employee experience. Well, are we putting food in the cafeteria or am I working from my ironing board today because my spouse sits in the real office in the house or whatever?
Right.
Like that's a different employee experience.
Right.
Mindfulness in the work, like all these things that were really important and really relevant suddenly are not relevant. And suddenly if you're still putting your content out there in the same way and not being tuned into where are people at today, that's gonna not work. The second piece as it relates to the social unrest is well regarded and valued highly in the organization. It was almost a check the box. We got to do sexual harassment. We got to do compliance. We got to do D&I. Now, for the first time in my memory, in my lifetime, that's changed. And the reason it's changed, my opinion, is employees are demanding it. Frontline or employees are demanding this type of intervention and training. Customers are demanding it, and the board's demanding it. So you're not going to get away with the same old, diversity 101 from 1988 that tells old white dudes like you and I that we have to hire people that don't look like us. That ain't going to work today. And if you're trying to put that out there as a leader to your people, you're going to have a revolt, either from your employees, your customers, or your board. Nobody wants any of those constituencies to be upset with you.
Yeah, indeed. What is, we talk about thought leadership, and we talk about that a lot. And that word gets thrown around, but a lot of the CEOs that I coach and C-suite people that I coach don't really understand what that is, right? So what is it? I mean, what does it mean?
Yeah, I think there's been. So when I started my business about 15 years ago, the word that made me nauseous was guru. I think if I were to have started today, thought leadership has been used, abused, etc. So let's go back to what it is and what it isn't, right? So one bucket of what it isn't is content marketing. There is a place in the world, there's a place in the universe for content marketing, right? So if I sell baby food, I want to teach moms about good nutrition in baby food. That's not thought leadership. That's teaching moms that, the ground up green stuff are peas and their vegetables, and the ground up, yellow stuff are banana, like whatever. That's not thought leadership, but don't confuse the two, right? Real thought leadership to me is, number one, break it down into its elements, thoughtful. So it's got to really, really be thoughtful. Now, thoughtfulness could come from world experience, consulting experience, academic experience, but it's got to really be thoughtful. And a lot of people are actually, quite frankly, lazy or just putting out other things. And then it's the leadership piece, which is the piece that excites me most. You acknowledge that you're in this discipline, whatever that is, creativity, innovation, leadership, sales, whatever, and you want to lead that discipline, you want to lead that conversation into a new direction, into a different direction, to potentially a contrarian direction, not because you just want to disagree with everyone, but you have something to add, and you want others to embark on that journey with you and lead it to the next level.
Right. Okay. So in saying that, do you think that it's sort of an imperative today as a CEO or as a leader of an organization to become a thought leader, or to really work towards becoming a thought leader? I go back in my own mind to when I was a CEO of a toy company, right? And I that was 2006, and the word wasn't really in my vocabulary, right? And I think for the first few years until probably mid 2010, 2011, that I really start thinking that, hey, I need to start working on my profile too, right? And not just about everything to the business. So is it an imperative today, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that question. So let's break it into two. One is the individual and two is the organization. Because I think there's different drivers for each. So as an organization, why would I invest in thought leadership, right? And the reason I would invest is we are all being commoditized, whether I literally sell commodities or I'm a consultant or high tech, or, everyone is facing that downward pressure of commoditization. If you're perceived as a commodity, then the only conversation to have with clients is around how low will your price be. Nobody wants to be there. So one way to effectively stand out from the crowded market in almost any domain is to be shown as a thought leader. And it's not just a way to elevate your brand, but if you do it well, it is, in my opinion, the single most cost-effective way to acquire net new clients, period, full stop. Right? Okay, so, I mean, I can't tell you, I haven't been flying much in the last 6 months, but how many times, I'm rushing through O'Hare or JFK or LAX, and you see the Accenture or the E&Y billboards. And I've always said to myself, has anybody in the history of consulting stopped and said, "Oh, Accenture, let me write that name down. Never heard of that name. Based on that billboard, I think I'm going to call those fellows up and maybe buy me, I don't know, 10, 20, $50 million worth of consulting. I think I'm going to do that." That's crazy. That's lazy marketing. But if I'm Accenture and I have an AI practice that's relatively new, I can get a huge ROI by putting out real thought leadership on AI consistently to the people that matter to me. And it's not every jerk that goes through O'Hare. Their target market's probably 1,000 people. So what can you put out there in a consistent way to the 1,000 people that matter, that you're trying to influence, so that when they become buyers or when the situation arises, you're top of mind because you've already showed your wares. So that's the organizational side of it. At the individual level, I think it is important to show thought leadership, because the reality is most individuals are not staying in their roles, depending on the higher up the food chain you go, the shorter it is, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. How many people do you know today that have been at their job, their companies, forget the job, 10 years?
Very,
Like
very few. Very
20%. If I asked you that question 15 years ago, you'd probably say half my corporate buddies. Oh yeah, they've been there. 10-year IBM guy. Those days are over. So instead of personal branding, if you can invest in your thought leadership, and as long as you're aligned to your employer, your brand, at the time that you're putting out there, and it's mutually beneficial, it's not Rhett's trying to be a rock star, that's great. That's a win for everybody. Then you leave, guess what? You get to take all that with you to the next thing. And by the way, when I'm looking for talent, if I have a choice between two folks, all else being equal, but Rhett's been writing, talking, speaking about blah, 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 I get all that for free as an employer. Why wouldn't I want that? It's beyond a tiebreaker.
Yeah. It's somebody that gets it, right? You know that person gets it. So let me ask you this then, is it, yeah, and I think you answered my question, because your business and your personal sort of have to be aligned, is what you're saying. I mean, it's, and okay. I mean, that makes sense to me, I guess.
Yeah, and they don't have to be 100% aligned, but where I've seen it managed poorly from a career perspective is somebody says, hey, I'm the C whatever at company X. I'm probably out of here in 18 months. And during that time, let me capture all the things I can working for big company X. I get to go to Davos, I get to go here, I get to go to there. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're going to write a book and they're going to speak and they're going to do that.
Yeah.
People get that. Come on. People understand, like, okay, because by the way, the day after you don't have that logo on the business card, there's a lot less people taking your calls. That's just a fact. The day you don't control a $100 million marketing budget, a lot less people are taking you to lunch.
That's just, that's 100% true. So when you guys are working with somebody, you're working, you talk about in some of the things that you help people with, sort of leveraging new products and services. What do you mean by that? Are you helping them create products out of their content, out of their expertise? How does that work?
So we have two distinct types of clients. We have organizations, professional services, high-tech financial services, that are developing and employing thought leadership and the underlying products, if you will, but not for direct monetization, right? So they're not looking to, have the SVP of AI be a paid speaker. They're evangelizing it. They're giving it all away. That's great. We apply the same models, methodologies, frameworks, and experience to that as we do to our core client base, which are individual or small consulting firms, authors, thought leaders, speakers, consultants, academics. Those folks are in the business of selling and monetizing their work. And you know a lot of these folks, right? In terms of being in the MG and all the places you are. So they have to directly monetize it because they're not living inside of a $40 billion company as a quasi-academic in residence. So those folks are looking to take something that started as an idea, landed in a speech or a book or a workshop or in their consulting tools, and productize that to a very well-defined target market in ways that teach the capabilities, drive an experience, etc. And that could be assessment tools, video-based training. The world is global. I mean, one of the exciting things about this is it's global. So whatever works for managers in North America, assuming it can be translated, would work for managers in places like Brazil, Russia, India, China, Singapore. And as an individual, COVID has taught us nothing else. It's like you're not as global as you thought you were.
So, I mean, there's really a system that you can really create a system that helps you do this. I mean,
yes.
So, I mean, because I think one of the things another question I get a lot is this how long did it take you to build thought leadership? How long did it take you to build authority, with startups and entrepreneurship? And I always talk about, look, this has been since 2010, probably, right?
No.
I mean, it's a long-term strategy, at least for me. Are there? I mean, and I think people are scared of that process, right? They want instant results. Is it? How long does it take? What is the? How does that work? Because it's not. It's not instant.
That's a great question, because there's no recipe that says blah, 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 stick it in the oven for 5 years and you're done, right? So what I've seen, or if there is, I haven't seen the recipe. What I've seen is people get into this business, and it is a business, in all sorts of weird, wacky, nonlinear, serendipitous ways, right? So everything from I wrote this blog one day 10 years ago, and it became a thing, and it became a thing, and my boss asked me to talk about it. And now, I don't know, I got a consulting company, and I speak a lot, and I do a lot. So there was never an applied strategy or deliberateness to it. So like when you got into the toy business, I'm sure there was some passion there, but I bet you had a plan. I bet you had a clearly defined target market. You had financial objectives, you had strategic objectives in market. Like, people don't do that in this space because they undervalue the opportunity cost in a big way. Right. So they think, hey, somebody invited me to speak, and wow, I can get paid like 20 grand to do that. That's a good use of an hour's worth of my time. And then what's next? So what happens to us is we come in at the point where someone's already have some level of success, and that could be a little to a lot or not enough, right, and are looking to now say, how do I grow and expand this? And that's where strategy comes in. So I think applying a strategy to really solid content, you can become a thought leader. I don't want to say quickly, because it does take time, but I don't think 10 years. I think it's it's listen. If you're looking for get rich quick, this ain't the business.
Right. How do people? You were talking about how we were a lot more mobile than we used to be in terms of moving careers, and have you seen it have a big impact on people's next kind of career move? And I mean, have you seen that really in action, and how that's worked?
Yeah, I mean, we'll use Marcus Buckingham, for example. So he was an employee at Gallup when they wrote one of the Strength Finders book. Then he became the face of. So this is an employee, right? Very, very smart man. Wrote a book because he was in the right place at the right time, wrote a really good book, had the chops to be a great speaker, drive a lot of business. Eventually there's a little bit of tension with Gallup in terms of privately held family-owned business. So he goes off and does his own thing, replicates it, builds that nicely. And then he gets acquired by ADP. How many employees do you know that have had an exit? Right?
Right.
Yeah, that's my point. So I think that there's so many ways to utilize thought leadership. I don't believe you need to live inside of a large organization to do it. As a matter of fact, I would say most of my clients are what I would politely call outliers that survive less in that structure of large organizations. And larger organizations aren't necessarily the most fertile ground for creativity, innovation, and thought leadership. If you live in a consulting firm, you're billing 2,000 hours this year. Oh, you want to write a book? Okay, well, there's another 2,000 hours. Figure out how to do both.
Yeah, I've always seen this as when you talk about thought leadership, I've always also thought about it as a part of my networking strategy. Right? It's a way to grow people and grow relationships and build relationships, and that's sort of how I've always looked at it. Is that sort of the right way to look at it?
I think it's a small piece of it. For some reason, you're far more interesting to a set of people the day after you write a book than you were the day you were before. There's I call it sort of the IQ inflation. People think the day that you write a book, you're 30 points higher on the IQ scale than you were the day before. So I think there is a little bit of networking relationship, but I wouldn't advocate doing it for that. For that and that alone.
Okay. What platforms work? I mean, for a business person, and obviously LinkedIn, but are there other things that you do to help build it more broadly, or what? Talk about that process and where you put where you help people build that leadership.
Yeah. So there's a couple pieces there. So again, it goes back to strategy. So step one is who are your client avatars? Because when a client comes to us and we say, okay, so tell me about who you are and what your work is, it's great. One of the things I'll inevitably say very early on in the process is, and who do you think this is ideally suited for? And there's two extreme type of answers I hear. One is, this would be great for everyone. That's the one that scares the hell out of me, because unless you have the marketing budget of Coca-Cola or Ford Motor Company or something, you don't have the ability to market to everybody. And you're probably a bit delusional, because very, very few things other than, sort of water and air are applicable to everyone. And if you think your take on leadership is the new thing, I would argue you probably haven't done your homework. The other answer I get is, hey, good question. I think this would be really, really good for a newly minted engineer that is now in a people management role for their first time. in a highly technical company. And I love that. Believe it or not, that's the one I do backflips over, because I'm like, you've thought this through really, really well and narrowed down and that's Charlie, that's my guy or gal, right? And everything I do is with them in mind. And then you say, great, what are the problems that person has that some intervention, some exposure to your work would solve? Well, they're really confident as individual contributor producing, writing code or whatever. Now they're in a new space and they don't like being in an uncomfortable new place. They might not have the people skills. Maybe they don't have the emotional. Okay, great, let's keep going. So now I understand that you have empathy and understanding of the pain that your client avatars are in. And then we talk about why you. Okay, so yeah, we've identified that maybe got a problem. Why are you uniquely qualified to solve it and how? So once we know that, then we just got to figure out where are they hanging out? Where are they hanging out online? Where are they hanging out offline, et cetera? As a general statement, I think oftentimes people dive into social media world and suspend all logic as it comes to strategy and targeting and reach. So right now, as a broad statement, LinkedIn appears to be the clear winner. There's more people there more often than not. However, if you're going after a highly academic base, SlideShare is still critically important. If you're going after a more youthful market, i.e. people that don't look like Rhett and I, a little less here, maybe TikTok's cool. I don't think anybody wants to see Rhett and I dancing around our kitchens doing the TikTok thing. And
not so much.
Yeah. So why would you put your energy there? So I think anything that you do from a social perspective is this where my peeps hang? Is this where they're getting information from? Is it aligned with the integrity of my brand? And what are the expected outcomes I have? Here's the other thing. I don't know anyone that's yet to pay their rent in a retweet or a like, right? And people talk about these things like they're currency. And unless you know for sure that it's a predictive indicator to the more likes I get from these type of people in this format, is a predictive indicator that they will email me, they will call me, they will reach out to my company. And ultimately, if I spend X dollars a year on these activities, I will yield some X multiple, and it's a marketing cost. And until you're able to do that, you're just experimenting. And experiments are fine, but you've got to do an ROI on it. You've got to have some expectations and KPIs and metrics.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there is really, really important, which is I think the perception is, and you kind of hit on it earlier too, you're really talking about narrowing in and focusing in like a laser beam on exactly who your customer is and exactly who you need to reach. And that actually does make it easier because I've been on this 10-year journey, but you can, and I haven't been particularly focused on a really, really narrow segment, but I see what you're saying is that you can really accelerate this with that focus. And I think that's a really good point.
And there's a counterintuitiveness to the more constraints you have, the easier it is to A, create content, and B, deploy it where it needs to be deployed. And people think that's not true. Oh, constraints mean I can't, means no. No, actually means you've eliminated waste. You've eliminated places that you shouldn't spend time, energy, effort, money on.
Yep. And I just covered up our face with the comment. But,
yeah, there we go. Okay.
But it's a good comment.
Someone argue that's a good idea. Is that a hot dog?
It is
covering our face. Oh.
Thanks, Paul, for the question.
And the hot dog. Thank you, Paul.
That was a big question. We'll get to it in just a minute. But let me ask you this, Peter. What? So when you're hiring, and I know a lot of us, this is complicated and hard to get our heads around. And we all know a little bit, probably enough to be dangerous. But, what you're talking about is really helping people get that focus and put their message in the right place. And that's not something we all have the experience to do. So when you're hiring and looking at somebody to help you do this as somebody that wants to grow their thought leadership, how do you find the right person, the right fit? What questions do you ask? Is it how do you find that right fit for you to help you sort of get your content ready and the focus?
Sure. Well, first I would tell you that oftentimes, people are trying to milk a chicken. And what I mean by that is, they're doing what everybody else does. Oh, I'm going to go to a PR firm.
That's why I love talking to you, because you come up with these.
You got the visual there? Yeah. No, so what I mean by that is somebody is in the process of, let's say, launching a book, right? So they talk to their book friends, and the book friends say, oh, you got to hire a PR agency. Great. So then they start to talk to the PR agency. Well, the PR agency's scope of what their domain expertise is how to effectively launch a book and get you attention around that book. Not necessarily, and there are some asterisks, there's some that do, developing the strategy to deploy your thought leadership, right? And do that in a cost-effective way. Because launching a book is not parallel or synonymous with launching a business. So I would think about broad range of experience. What are the cases that look like yours? And have they done what you're looking for? There are very few people that, like my firm is a bit unusual because we don't come from book world. So almost all of our clients have written book or books or are in the process, almost all. But we're not book guys and gals, right? So we weren't former book agents where that's where we come from. We're looking at this and go, okay, a book is one place that your ideas could live, one thought leadership. There are certain rules and cadences of what you need to do to get a book out there. But the reality is, unless your name's Clinton or Obama, the amount of money you're making on the book, it's probably going to cost you money, fully loaded opportunity cost. So what is the underlying business? What does success look like? How do we look at this to say, okay, I'm going to do this and spend 6 months of my life to do what? What is, I would say to clients, okay, we're going to hang up in a year. I'm going to give you the magic pill. All your dreams come true. Now we're talking in a year. What is that? And don't tell me New York Times bestseller list or any of that. Like those are typically vanity metrics. But what does this really mean? Does it mean you took your business from 1 million to 10? Does it mean you acquired 10 Fortune 50 clients? Does it mean that you've got this underlying video-based training system that you want to have 5,000 seats sold? Like, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, number of books sold only as it relates to getting them in the right hands of the right people.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense, because I think I remember the advice I got when the second book came out, and it was, you got to go out and get a publicist, and you're right. We never talked about the thought leadership and what the impact of that book was going to be long-term and how that was going to impact my business. It was, how many media hits can I get you? Right. How many books can I help you sell? And and I think you're absolutely right. That maybe I was asking the wrong questions. I think that's.
Yeah. And I think the better way to do it is say, this is my strategy. This is where I'm taking my business. Okay. PR agency, you're one of the tools in the shed. Do you understand my overarching strategy? If I don't have one, I can't tell it to you. And let's make sure that everything that you're recommending to me is aligned with that. Because if you're telling me AM radio tour, do an AM radio tour and you be on W whatever in Pittsburgh. Okay, so show me how that's going to drive my strategy of connecting to these type of people to do these types of things. And if you can't connect the dots, we're not going to consider that. It's a bit of a higher bar than most are comfortable with, but I would strongly see, if it was my money, I would definitely be putting those challenges out there.
So let's see. We've got a couple questions. Anthony Tony says, sad truth, red ocean people sucking needy people into the pipeline of success.
Can you ask that in the form of a question, Alex?
Says he loves the IQ analogy. He says, Peter, do you think being a contrarian blue ocean type coupled with a high degree of success is a good strategy to achieving thought leadership?
For some, I mean, I think I think for some.
Okay. What the hell does all that mean?
What do you mean?
What is he asking? I do not understand that.
Yes.
Okay.
Magic 8 Ball says perhaps. Oh, good. Another hot dog.
I can't help but think thought leadership is what people should be doing to move themselves and the world forward. That it could be monetized is gravy. Those not thinking about the future and how to get there first are not worth considering.
Yeah. So I love that. So part of what we do early on in our process with a client is say, what drives you? My experience, there's 3 things that drive thought leaders, right? And it's not pick one, it's more of a pie chart. I'm a consultant. I teach, I think in matrices and pie charts, it's like a learning disability. But number 1 is money. So is money really important to you? Somewhat important, not important to you? Okay, let's have that conversation. Ego. So ego out of control is narcissism. We don't like to deal with narcissists, so we don't do that. But ego, is it really gratifying to you that when people process and internalize something that you created, you feel gratified? There's nothing wrong with that. And do you like to do things that feed your ego? When Rhett, when you're coaching a client, you have a breakthrough, that is gratifying to your ego. And there's nothing wrong with that. The third piece, which I think goes to I can't see the guy's name now, the hot dog question.
Paul.
Paul. Sorry, Paul. The third piece is for some folks, just getting it out there. I call that evangelical, that, part of and not in the religious perspective, part of the reason I'm on this earth is to get this content out there and evangelize on it and democratize and get it out there. And that's fine too. And I think it's judgmental to say, no, it only has to be that, or if you're only doing it for the money, that's bad, or if you're only feeding your ego, you're a jerk. I think what's your fit? And by the way, that changes over time. I mean, there are times in our lives where money's really important. Then I make the money, then I might want to give more back.
Yeah, so I agree with that, because I think it's okay to have that ego and want your message out there. I think that's okay. I think that's okay. So Samuel asked, and thank you, Paul, for that question. We need to catch up soon, my friend. Does servant leadership help grow? Servant leadership help to grow using thought leadership model? I'm not sure I understand that, but
if I'll try to understand the question. I mean, servant leadership is a platform, is a specific flavor, if you will, of leadership, and it's great, right? And they clearly use thought leadership to get the message out in an evangelical way, to monetize it. I can't speak to the ego needs of the creators of that stuff, but it's clearly being monetized. It's clearly being evangelized. And I would say it's doing good and doing well from that perspective. And they are constantly getting great, high quality thought leadership out there, not just books, but on an ongoing basis to the right people. I mean, servant leadership is a bit, and this is the ultimate sort of complement for thought leadership, is evergreen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So last question I have, unless we've got any more of you out there who want to ask a question. So what worries Peter Winick right now? What are you worried about, and what are you excited about with everything that's going on in the world, and what worries?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm worried about my friends and colleagues that have been overly dependent on speaking, because, by the way, it's easy to get proverbial fat and lazy when you get paid, 15, 20, 40 grand for an hour's worth of work and it ends in a standing ovation. My mailman, at the end of the day, I don't think anybody applauds to him, and I know he's not making 40 grand an hour. So people that haven't sort of reinvented themselves, because I don't think COVID is a resume situation for thought leaders where, oh, good, I'll just go back to doing whatever. And if you have that mindset, I think you're done. So the speakers that are struggling because they've been really, really, really good at the old model of, I have a brand, I have demand, people come to me, I go to Orlando, I go to Scottsdale, I go to London, I speak, I make great money, boom. If they're not real, I feel sad or concerned, I should say, for those that aren't actively and aggressively ripping everything apart and putting it back together and reinventing. I got this message, I have these people that can benefit from it. The speaking thing, who knows where that's going to be in 6 months or a year. How else can I get to them? The flip side of what you said, and what I'm excited about is that opportunity. So right now, for example, trade associations that sponsor all these events that hired all these speakers are in deep trouble. However, there are also new doors, because what trade associations often forgot was why do they exist? They exist to serve and educate their members. Okay, well, if I can't do that by getting everybody to, Las Vegas the third week in March, how else can I do it? Well, I can aggregate a bunch of thought leadership from a bunch of thought leaders and maybe take a rev share from them and push out various creative and innovative content to my members to serve and educate them. So I think it's forced innovation. I think, on the one hand, what COVID did is accelerate things that are already in process. Work from home is not a new concept. An entire country working, or our entire world working from home on an hour's notice, that's kind of a new concept. Distance learning, not a new concept. 50 or 60 or 70% of our undergrad population now doing it, that's a new concept. So I see it as an accelerant to some degree. And then people have to adjust and say, do I like this? What are the parts of it I like? What don't I like? I don't know anybody that misses their commute that was traveling, anybody miss being on the 405 or any of that stuff?
No, I was telling somebody yesterday, I do not miss getting on a plane twice a month to go somewhere and then getting, spend a day traveling, get somewhere, stay for a night, do a talk, turn around and come back. I don't miss it.
Right.
I don't. And yes, as a hit to the pocketbook, but at the same time, you're absolutely right. I think it opens so many more doors, and ultimately is going to be better, because I can now, instead of doing 2 or 3 events a month, maybe I can do 4, because all I have to do is I can do it like this. I can do it on a video thing, right? It's actually more efficient for me.
Yeah. Now the trick is, and I think a lot of people are struggling with this, how do you articulate your value to your client? This is, listen, my fee was X and it is still X. The fact that we're not, in the same time, physically in the same room, you got to be really thoughtful about that. Because in some instances, the value prop is not the same. The onus is on you to rethink and recreate the experience, because the keynote is not a 45-minute Zoom. That's not a fair exchange. So you got to put a little bit more thought, a little bit more work. How can I support you, et cetera? Because I'm seeing people doing this knee-jerk, well, I'll drop my fees. How about 75%? Well, yeah, how about trying to recover from that? Something reasonable to offset the friction of travel, 15, 20%. Okay, that's reasonable to me, because you're giving up, 2 days of, staying at a Marriott and flying cross country or whatever. That's a reasonable exchange. 75%, not so much.
No. And what we found is it's not just the 45-minute Zoom call now. Now it's going to be some breakout room work.
Yeah.
It's going to be small group work. It's going to be maybe a seminar with your leadership. I mean, it's going to be a lot more of that give and take to get that same value, I guess, to give that same value.
And I think the other piece is you're going to have to start moving to a world where you own every touch point and the relationship with your client, because I think a lot of the bureaus are going to sort of fall apart, the classic speaking bureau model. And if you didn't have systems and your search optimized and all that sort of stuff to get people to find you, the right people to find you to solve their problems, and you were relying on that, I think that's another issue that you need to address and resolve.
That's good to know. That's good insight, because I think you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about the speakers bureaus and how that's going to impact there.
Yeah, I think some will evolve. I mean, listen, there's going to be Washington Speakers Bureau will be there forever, and there's several others at that level. Harry Walker, et cetera. Some will evolve and try new things, advisory work, whatever. I think, are they really serving a place in the market anymore for most people most of the time? And I would argue, much like Liberty Travel, not so much. And this just accelerated the inevitable demise of a big chunk of that industry.
Yes, please.
Well, Peter, it's been great. How can people find you online?
Yeah, so you go to the site, which is thoughtleadershipleverage.com. All the usual places, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. You could email me directly at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com as well.
And we'll put that in the feed right after the show so that people can get directly to the link if you feel so inclined. Thank you for being with us here today on Power Lunch Live, spending a little time with us while you're working or while you're eating, wherever you are. And we appreciate that. We'll be back next week with a full week of shows. We're just sort of inching back into the program after our summer hiatus. And it's good to be back with you. Have a great day. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you next week.